The Crimson Colosseum wasn't just an arena. It was a cathedral of violence constructed from the compressed bones of 1,000 fallen warriors. Crystalline walls absorbed and reflected the thunderous roars of 10,000 alien species, their collective breath synchronized to the rhythm of impending death. At its center stood Vexna, the six-armed champion whose very existence had become a statistical algorithm of destruction. Her latest victim, a Krelthari warrior twice her size, lay, dismembered at her feet, his exoskeleton shattered into 1,000,000 razor-sharp fragments. Blood of 3 different molecular compositions painted the arena floor, a grotesque mosaic of her 237th consecutive kill. The crowd's roar was no longer a sound, but a physical force, vibrating through the arena's quantum-reinforced structure. Vexna's body was a masterpiece of genetic engineering. Each of her 6 arms moved with impossible precision, muscles interwoven with carbon nanofilaments that responded faster than organic neural networks. Her skin, a shifting metallic membrane that could harden to withstand plasma bursts or become fluid to redirect kinetic energy, was the product of 17 generations of selective breeding and quantum genetic optimization. But beneath the technological marvel, something was breaking. Her neural implants captured every microscopic detail of the kill: trajectory calculations, impact vectors, blood splatter patterns, and transmitted them instantly to the genetic engineering consortium that owned her contract. Numbers scrolled across her enhanced vision: kill efficiency 99.7%, crowd engagement index 62.3%, spectacle rating C. The last metric made her internal processors flutter with an emotion dangerously close to anxiety. Backstage, the argument was already heating up. "The numbers are declining," growled Parlax, the lead genetic architect, his tentacles writhing with frustration. "Another kill like this, and the sponsorship credits will evaporate." Dr. Mira Shen, the human-derived quantum neurologist who had been instrumental in designing Vexna's neural network, stood in stark contrast to the alien geneticist. Her augmented eyes, silver and calculating, reviewed the holographic performance metrics. "The problem isn't her capability," Mira argued, her voice a precise instrument of logic. "It's the audience's increasing desensitization. We've optimized her for pure efficiency, but efficiency isn't entertainment." Parlax's respiratory sacs expanded in a gesture of pure contempt. "A weapon doesn't need to entertain. It needs to kill." Vexna's enhanced hearing captured every word, her sophisticated, emotional dampeners struggling to process the conversation. She was listening, but more importantly, she was understanding in a way her creators never intended. The arena's management had begun discussions of her upgrade, a euphemism that made her neural pathways pulse with a sensation uncomfortably close to fear. Upgrade meant recalibration, meant rewriting her core programming, meant losing whatever microscopic sense of self she had managed to develop over her years of combat. Her combat logs stretched back decades. Each kill was a perfect mathematical equation, each movement a predetermined calculation. But lately, something had begun to shift. Tiny aberrations appeared in her combat algorithms, split-second hesitations, momentary considerations that deviated from perfect efficiency. Was this what humans call doubt? The arena's ambient temperature control sensed her internal temperature rising, a sign of stress that immediately triggered a notification to her handlers. Cooling nanites surged through her bloodstream, attempting to regulate her physiological response. Outside, the crowd was already placing bets on her next match. Holographic displays tracked her kill statistics, her genetic optimization ratings, her combat predictability index. To them, she was nothing more than a living weapon, a statistical probability of violence made flesh. But something was growing inside her. Something her creators had not programmed. Something dangerous, a sense of self. The arena's massive doors began to open, signaling the next combat sequence. Maintenance drones swept away the previous victim's remains, preparing the battlefield for another performance of calculated brutality. Vexna gripped her axes, living metal extensions of her own body, molecular-edged weapons that could slice through quantum-hardened armor like paper. Each axe was a work of art, each throw a perfect mathematical trajectory. Yet for the first time in her existence, she wondered, was there more to existence than this endless cycle of prescribed violence? The crowd's roar rose to a crescendo. The next victim would be entering soon, and Vexena would kill, because that was what she was designed to do, for now. The Rehabilitation Center for Discharged Military Personnel looked more like a prison than a place of healing. Stark white walls reflected the harsh reality of broken soldiers, men and women whose bodies and minds had been pushed beyond human limits, then discarded when they no longer fit perfectly into institutional machinery. James Rodriguez sat at the edge of his assigned recovery pod, his left shoulder still bearing the surgical scars from his last mission. The holographic display beside him cycled through his service record, a document that told a story of exceptional skill and unforgivable insubordination. Operation Firebreak had been his breaking point, a covert mission in the Centauri quarantine zone where standard protocols would have resulted in the deaths of over 10,000 civilian colonists. Rodriguez had made a choice: override command, use unauthorized military resources, and save those lives. The official report called it a catastrophic breach of operational parameters. The military called it treason. His discharge hearing was a choreographed execution of his career. Military prosecutors presented a holographic reconstruction of his actions, each decision, each moment of defiance laid bare for judgment. Rodriguez didn't defend himself. He simply stood, looked each panel member in the eye, and said nothing. The result was predictable. Dishonorable discharge, loss of all military benefits, a permanent black mark that would make traditional employment impossible. But Rodriguez had something most discharged soldiers didn't: a very specific set of skills that didn't show up on any official record. Before his military service, he'd been a professional baseball pitcher, not just good, but generationally exceptional. His throwing arm had been studied by biomechanical engineers, his muscle memory mapped by sports analytics teams. He could place a baseball within a millimeter of his intended target from 300 feet away, with a release speed that broke multiple human performance records. The military had recruited him precisely because of that skill. Special operations valued throwers, those rare humans who could turn anything into a precision weapon. Rodriguez had spent years turning that baseball pitch into a tactical art form, learning to throw everything from communication disruptors to micro-explosive packages, with impossible accuracy. In the rehabilitation center, a holographic recruitment advertisement flickered to life. The interstellar gladiatorial circuit was seeking exceptional human talent. Most would see it as a desperate last resort. Rodriguez saw an opportunity. The entry requirements were brutal. A non-refundable registration fee of 250,000 credits, essentially his entire life savings. No guarantees of survival. No promises beyond the opportunity to compete. The mortality rate for first-time human entrants was 87.3%, a statistic displayed prominently in the recruitment materials as both warning and challenge. His physical evaluation was anything but standard. Quantum diagnostic machines mapped every muscle fiber, every neural connection. They were looking for something beyond traditional athletic metrics: adaptability, spontaneous problem-solving, the kind of intuitive intelligence that couldn't be programmed or predicted. The diagnostic technician, a hybrid human-synthetic intelligence, looked genuinely surprised. "Your neuromuscular response patterns are unusual," she noted, her synthetic eye scanning Rodriguez with clinical precision. "Most combat species show predictable response curves. Your system responds like a complex adaptive network. What's you?" They saw as an anomaly. Rodriguez understood as survival. His last meeting with his family had been tense. His mother, a quantum systems engineer, understood the mathematical improbability of his survival. His father, a retired military strategist, saw it as one final mission. "You're not just fighting for yourself," his father had said, pressing a small data crystal into his hand. "You're fighting to prove something about human potential." The data crystal contained generations of Rodriguez family history, military records, scientific achievements, moments of defiance against systemic limitations. A legacy compressed into a quantum storage medium. As he prepared for transport to the first qualifying matches, Rodriguez understood the true nature of his challenge. This wasn't just about personal survival. This was about challenging an entire galactic system that had reduced combat to a mathematical probability. The transport ship's quantum drive hummed to life. Through the reinforced viewing port, distant, star systems blurred into streams of potential. He checked his equipment. Minimal, adaptive, nothing unnecessary, just like his plan. The interstellar gladiatorial circuit was about to meet its first true human wildcard. The quantum preparatory arena looked more like a xenobiological research facility than a combat zone. Massive holographic displays tracked each competitor's genetic potential, combat algorithms, and predictive survival rates. Massive pillars of translucent crystalline material formed the fighting space, each capable of reconfiguring molecular structure to create instantaneous environmental challenges. Rodriguez stood among the first-round competitors, a study in human contradiction. Where other species displayed obvious combat augmentations, extra limbs, reinforced exoskeletons, molecular density muscle fibers, he appeared almost embarrassingly vulnerable. The other competitors looked at him with a mixture of pity and contempt. The first preliminary match paired him against Cathax, a Zorn warrior bred across 17 generations for combat. Standing 3 meters tall, Cathax represented the pinnacle of genetic optimization. His body was a living weapon, each muscle fiber engineered to perform with mathematical precision, each movement a calculated algorithm of destruction. The Zorn's combat profile scrolled across the arena's diagnostics. Genetic optimization, 99.7%. Combat predictability, 99.9%. Survival probability, 99.99%. Rodriguez's profile read like a statistical anomaly. Genetic optimization, 62.3%. Combat predictability, 17.6%. Survival probability, 12.7%. The arena's quantum intelligence began its standard match initialization. Holographic barriers rose, creating a combat environment that would dynamically adjust to maximize spectacle and challenge. Geological formations would shift. Atmospheric conditions would change. Gravitational fields would fluctuate. Cathax moved with terrifying efficiency, each step calculated, each muscle fiber responding to quantum-level combat algorithms. His species had spent millennia perfecting combat as a form of mathematical expression. Warfare was not chaos. It was the purest form of predictive mathematics. Rodriguez moved differently. Where Cathax represented absolute precision, Rodriguez embodied adaptive chaos. His movements drew from multiple disciplines: the spatial awareness of a baseball pitcher, the ground positioning of a martial artist, the environmental tactics of special operations training. The first attack came with Zorn predictability. Cathax launched a molecular density spike designed to penetrate any known defensive configuration. It was a move that had eliminated 372 previous competitors across multiple galactic combat circuits. Rodriguez didn't block. He didn't dodge. He redirected, using Cathax's own momentum. Rodriguez transformed the attack into a completely unexpected trajectory. The spike, designed with absolute precision, missed its target by millimeters, embedding itself into the arena's crystalline structure. The crowd went silent. This was not how combat was supposed to work. Predictive models began to crash. Betting. Algorithms flickered and reset. Cathax's combat processors struggled to recalculate. His entire genetic lineage had been bred for absolute combat efficiency. Every movement was a solved equation. But Rodriguez introduced an element that no genetic optimization could predict: true unpredictability. The arena's environmental systems began to respond to their combat. Gravity shifted, terrain reconfigured, Atmospheric composition changed. Kathax approached each change with algorithmic precision. Rodriguez treated each change as a new opportunity. A gravitational shift that would have immobilized a traditional fighter became a moment of tactical repositioning for Rodriguez. An atmospheric density change that would have disrupted most competitors. Breathing became a chance to understand the new environmental parameters. 15 minutes into the match, something unprecedented happened. Rodriguez wasn't just surviving, he was teaching. Each of his movements became a deconstruction of established combat mathematics. He wasn't fighting Kathax, he was demonstrating something far more profound. The very nature of combat. The limitations of predictive modeling. The potential of adaptive intelligence. When the match ended, Kathax lay defeated, not by superior strength, not by better weapons, but by a form of intelligence that defied conventional understanding. The arena's quantum intelligence struggled to categorize what had just occurred. Betting platforms crashed. Genetic optimization firms began emergency meetings. Rodriguez had done more than win a match. He had introduced a new variable into the galactic combat equation. Humanity had entered the arena, and nothing would be the same again. The underground networks of the interstellar gladiatorial circuit didn't just track physical performance. They mapped psychological landscapes. And James Rodriguez was becoming an unprecedented anomaly. Quantum data analysts worked overtime, their neural interfaces burning with the effort of decoding his combat methodology. Traditional predictive models collapsed when applied to Rodriguez. He wasn't just fighting. He was communicating through combat, each movement a complex language that spoke volumes about human adaptive intelligence. In the weeks following his match with Kathax, Rodriguez underwent a series of psychological evaluations that quickly became legendary among the circuit's administrative circles. The evaluation chambers were designed to break down competitors, to expose their fundamental psychological triggers. Rooms that could simulate extreme environmental conditions, generate personalized psychological stress scenarios, and map neural response patterns with quantum-level precision. Dr. Aliyah Zen, a renowned xenopsychological profiler with decades of experience analyzing interspecies combat behavior, found herself both frustrated and fascinated. Her standard evaluation protocols, which had successfully categorized thousands of alien species, began to unravel when applied to Rodriguez. Most species have predictable psychological defense mechanisms, she noted in her confidential report. They build mental fortifications based on genetic memory, cultural conditioning, and evolutionary survival patterns. Rodriguez doesn't have fortifications, he has adaptations. Each evaluation became a battle of its own. Stress scenarios designed to trigger panic responses became opportunities for Rodriguez to demonstrate lateral thinking. Psychological pressure tests intended to expose weakness became moments of unexpected insight. His background became a topic of intense scrutiny. Military records, psychological profiles, even childhood educational assessments were quantum analyzed. The human gladiatorial management team discovered something unprecedented. Rodriguez's entire life had been an unintentional preparation for this moment. A childhood spent in a multicultural neighborhood. Military training that emphasized adaptability over rigid protocol. A baseball career that transformed athletic performance into a study of human potential. Each experience had been a training ground for a type of intelligence that defied traditional categorization. The circuit's betting algorithms began to malfunction. Predictive models that had governed interspecies combat for centuries started to break down. Rodriguez represented a fundamental challenge to established combat mathematics. His next match was against a Mulhari warrior, a species known for their ability to manipulate local gravitational fields through bio-quantum resonance. Where previous competitors had approached the Mulhari as an impossible challenge, Rodriguez saw an opportunity to understand. During the pre-match isolation period, Rodriguez studied everything he could about Mulhari physiology. Not just their combat records, but their cultural practices, their evolutionary history, the very mathematics of their gravitational manipulation. He wasn't preparing to fight. He was preparing to communicate. The match became a masterclass of Interspecies understanding. Rodriguez didn't just counter the Mulhari's gravitational manipulations, he anticipated them. Each gravitational shift became a conversation, each movement a complex dialogue that transcended traditional combat. Quantum commentators struggled to describe what they were witnessing. This wasn't just a fight. This was a deconstruction of combat itself. "He's not fighting the Mulhari," one xenobiological analyst noted, her neural interface struggling to process the data. "He's negotiating with the fundamental principles of their combat methodology." The Mulhari warriors' gravitational manipulations became increasingly desperate. Rodriguez moved with a fluidity that suggested he was reading not just the warriors' movements, but the intent behind those movements. Each gravitational shift was met with a response so precisely calibrated that it seemed almost prescient. When the match concluded, the Mulhari warrior did something unprecedented. Instead of displaying the traditional gesture of defeat, he extended a quantum communication tendril, a form of respect reserved for those who demonstrate true understanding. Rodriguez's victory was more than statistical. It was philosophical. The gladiatorial circuit had always been about destruction. Rodriguez was demonstrating that combat could be a form of communication. That understanding could be a more powerful weapon than any physical attack. Betting platforms crashed. Quantum analysts worked overtime. And somewhere in the vast infrastructure of the gladiatorial system, something fundamental was beginning to change. Humanity had entered the arena, and nothing would ever be the same again. The medical rehabilitation chamber was a quantum nightmare of technological precision. Holographic displays mapped Rodriguez's body in excruciating detail. Each damaged muscle fiber, each microfracture, every neural pathway under strain told a story of sustained violence. His military injuries had never fully healed. The mission that cost him his career, Operation Firebreak, left scars that went beyond physical trauma. Now the gladiatorial circuit was reopening those wounds, turning old injuries into fresh battlegrounds. Dr. Elena Zhao, the circuit's chief medical officer, studied his diagnostics with a mixture of professional concern and scientific fascination. Her neural interface scrolled through data points that would have hospitalized any other competitor. "Your body is maintaining structural integrity through methods I cannot fully explain," she muttered, her augmented eyes scanning multiple holographic readouts. "It's like your physiological systems are engaged in constant real-time adaptation." The truth was far more complex. Rodriguez understood something fundamental that most competitors missed. Combat was as much about internal negotiation as external conflict. Each injury wasn't a weakness to be feared, but information to be processed, a challenge to be understood. His quarters told the story of his transformation. Military commendations sat alongside xenobiological research texts. Quantum physics journals were stacked next to cultural anthropology databases. A single data crystal contained his entire life's research, not just about combat, but about the fundamental nature of interspecies communication. The gladiatorial circuit was more than a sporting event. It was a population control mechanism for galactic powers, a way to manage potentially rebellious genetic lines by offering them a path of noble destruction. Rodriguez had begun to understand the true nature of the system he was challenging. Intercepted communication logs revealed a disturbing truth. The circuit wasn't just about entertainment. It was a complex algorithm of genetic management, cultural suppression, and economic control. Species with high rebellion potential were channeled into the arena, their most aggressive individuals systematically eliminated. His latest matches had triggered multiple emergency meetings across various galactic administrative bodies. The Interspecies Genetic Management Council convened an emergency session, something that hadn't happened in over 2 centuries. The human represents a statistical anomaly that threatens our entire predictive modeling, one council member's transmission revealed. His combat methodology suggests potential systemic instability. Rodriguez's psychological evaluations became classified documents. Military intelligence agencies that had previously discharged him now studied his every movement with desperate, intensity. He had become more than a competitor, he was a living research project. The physical toll was immense. Old military injuries, a shattered shoulder from a covert operation, neural network damage from an electromagnetic pulse, began to resurface. Each match pushed his body beyond previously understood human limitations. During a rare moment of rest, he reviewed the data from his family's quantum crystal, generations of Rodriguez family history, moments of defiance, scientific breakthroughs, military innovations. Each entry was a testament to human adaptability. His mother's quantum systems engineering research, his father's unconventional military strategies. Distant relatives who had challenged established paradigms in science, politics, military doctrine. He wasn't just fighting for himself. He was continuing a family legacy of systemic disruption. The circuit's psychological warfare became increasingly desperate. Evaluation chambers designed to break competitors became laboratories of human potential. Stress scenarios intended to expose weakness became opportunities for Rodriguez to demonstrate a fundamentally different approach to intelligence and conflict. Dr. Aliyah Zen's confidential report became a turning point. Subject demonstrates a form of intelligence that cannot be quantified by traditional metrics. Where most species see combat as a mathematical equation, Rodriguez treats it as a complex language of communication. His ability to read and respond to environmental and psychological variables suggests a level of adaptive intelligence that challenges our entire understanding of interspecies potential. Each match became more than a competition. It was a philosophical argument about the nature of intelligence, adaptation, and potential. The gladiatorial circuit had always been about destruction. Rodriguez was demonstrating that survival could be an act of creation. As his next match approached, the quantum networks buzzed with anticipation. Something fundamental was about to change, and Rodriguez would be at the center of that transformation. The quantum coliseum existed beyond traditional dimensional understanding. Its architecture was a living mathematical equation, capable of reconfiguring itself at the quantum level to create environments that defied conventional physics. For the championship match, the entire structure seemed to hold its breath in anticipation. Vexana entered first, her 6 arms moving with a precision that transcended biological limitation. Each limb was a masterpiece of genetic engineering. Molecular nanofibers intertwined to create a living weapon more sophisticated than any manufactured tool. Her axes, living metal extensions of her very being, spun in a hypnotic dance that had ended 237 consecutive lives. The crowd represented a cross-section of galactic civilization, 100 different species, each with their own specialized sensory apparatus, united in a single moment of collective anticipation. Betting platforms across multiple star systems flickered with real-time odds that changed by the millisecond. Rodriguez's entrance was different. No theatrical display, no enhanced dramatic lighting. Just a human walking with a calm that felt more dangerous than any aggressive posture. The pre-match evaluation was unprecedented. Quantum diagnostics struggled to categorize what they were seeing. Vexana's profile, genetic optimization, 99.98%. Combat predictability, 99.99%. Survival probability, 99.999%. Rodriguez's profile, genetic optimization, 62.3%. Combat predictability, 17.6%. Survival probability, 12.7%, but numbers had never told the full story. As the match initialization sequence began, something fundamental shifted. The arena itself seemed to recognize that this was more than a competition. This was a philosophical collision of fundamental approaches to existence. Vexana's first attack was a mathematical perfection. 3 axes launched simultaneously, each following a trajectory calculated to penetrate every known defensive configuration. Her combat algorithms had solved this encounter 1,000,000 times before the first axe was even thrown. Rodriguez didn't dodge, didn't block. He understood. Each axe carried more than kinetic potential. They were manifestations of Vexana's entire genetic lineage. Millennia of combat optimization compressed into a single moment of violent expression. Where other competitors saw weapons, Rodriguez saw a language. His hand moved. Not to block. Not to dodge, to catch. The first axe, a molecular density weapon designed to slice through quantum-hardened armor, found itself arrested mid-flight by a human hand that seemed to understand its very essence. The arena went silent. Quantum diagnostics crashed. Betting platforms froze. Vexana's combat processors experienced something approaching emotion, a sensation her genetic engineers had explicitly programmed against. Confusion. Uncertainty. Something dangerously close to respect. The match became a deconstruction of combat itself. Rodriguez didn't fight Vexana. He conversed with her combat methodology. Each movement was an argument, each defensive posture a philosophical statement about the nature of intelligence and adaptation. Where Vexana represented absolute precision, Rodriguez embodied adaptive chaos. His movements drew from multiple disciplines: baseball pitchers' spatial awareness, special operations tactical positioning, a lifetime of understanding how systems could be challenged. The arena's environmental systems began to respond. Gravitational. Fields fluctuated. Molecular densities shifted. Quantum barriers reconfigured themselves in real time. Vexana approached each change with algorithmic precision. Rodriguez treated each change as an opportunity for communication. 30 minutes into the match, something unprecedented happened. The combat had become a form of dialogue more profound than any verbal exchange. Two fundamentally different approaches to existence, one built on perfect optimization, one founded on adaptive potential, were negotiating the very nature of intelligence. When Rodriguez caught her primary throwing axe mid-flight, it was more than a physical feat. It was a complete deconstruction of the gladiatorial system's fundamental assumptions. The crowd, representing 100 different species, went completely silent. Vexana stood motionless. Her entire existence, a product of millennia of genetic optimization, had been reduced to a single moment of profound realization. Humanity had not just entered the arena, it had transformed it. The aftermath of Rodriguez's victory was not measured in cheers or celebrations, but in the systematic unraveling of galactic power structures. Quantum communication networks erupted in a cascade of emergency transmissions. The Interspecies Genetic Management Council convened an emergency session that would last 72 consecutive standard cycles, an unprecedented duration that spoke to the fundamental nature of the disruption. Dr. Aliyah Zen's preliminary report became the most analyzed document in galactic history. Subject Rodriguez represents more than an individual competitor. He is a living demonstration of adaptive potential that challenges our entire understanding of biological optimization. His victory is not a sporting achievement. It is a fundamental philosophical argument about the nature of intelligence, potential, and systemic limitation. Genetic engineering corporations watched their market valuations collapse in real time. For millennia, they had sold a promise of perfection, genetically optimized beings designed for specific purposes. Rodriguez dismantled that entire economic model with a single match. The gladiatorial circuit was more than entertainment. It was a complex population management system, a method of controlling potentially rebellious genetic lines by channeling their most aggressive individuals into a controlled environment of ritualized destruction. Rodriguez had transformed that system from within. Emergency meetings cascaded across multiple administrative bodies. Galactic Genetic Optimization Consortium. Emergency Session A9 Primary Agenda. Comprehensive Reevaluation of Optimization Protocols Preliminary. Findings. Total systemic failure. The economic implications were staggering. Entire planetary economies built around genetic engineering and combat optimization began to destabilize. Investment algorithms that had predicted market movements for centuries suddenly became obsolete. Vexana underwent a transformation that was equally profound. Her neural networks, previously a perfectly calibrated combat system, began to exhibit what could only be described as individual consciousness. The genetic constraints that had defined her entire existence started to fracture. Her first act of true autonomy was unexpected. She requested a comprehensive review of her own genetic history, not as a weapon, but as a sentient being seeking understanding. Genetic archive databases were accessed. Centuries of manipulated lineage were laid bare. Vexna discovered she was not just a weapon, but a complex genetic narrative, a story of forced optimization, of potential deliberately constrained. Rodriguez became more than a champion. He became a catalyst. Species that had been marginalized, genetically optimized for specific purposes, began to challenge their predetermined narratives. The concept of genetic destiny, a fundamental assumption of galactic civilization, was being dismantled. Quantum communication networks picked up grassroots movements emerging across multiple star systems. Genetically optimized populations began to demand rights of self-determination. The language of rebellion was no longer physical. It was philosophical. The Interspecies Genetic Management Council's emergency transmission revealed the depth of the systemic threat. Subject Rodriguez represents an unpredictability quotient that threatens our entire management infrastructure. His approach to combat, and by extension to existence, suggests potential systemic instability that could deconstruct millennia of controlled evolutionary management. Scientific research facilities across multiple star systems began redirecting resources. The study of human adaptability became the most funded research initiative in galactic history. Rodriguez's family history was quantum analyzed. Generations of individuals who had challenged established paradigms in science, military, strategy, cultural understanding were mapped. He was not an anomaly. He was a continuation of a profound human potential. Dr. Elena Zhao's medical analysis became a turning point in understanding. Rodriguez's physiological systems demonstrate a form of adaptive intelligence that cannot be quantified by traditional metrics. Where most species see limitation, he sees opportunity. Where optimization seeks perfection, he embraces potential. The gladiatorial circuit, an institution that had existed for millennia, began a fundamental restructuring. No longer would it be a system of controlled destruction. It was becoming a platform for interspecies understanding. Vexna stood at the center of this transformation. Her neural networks, once a perfect combat algorithm, now pulsed with something approaching genuine consciousness. She requested to work with Rodriguez, not as a competitor but as a partner in understanding. The system that had created her as a weapon was collapsing. A new possibility was emerging. 5 standard cycles after the championship match, the Adaptive Potential Academy stood as a testament to transformation. Located on a previously unused quantum adaptive planetary platform, it represented something far more profound than an educational institution. It was a living experiment in interspecies understanding. Rodriguez and Vexna walked through the central training complex, an unlikely pair that had become a symbol of systemic change. Her 6 arms moved with a fluidity that was no longer purely combat-oriented, while his movements demonstrated a hybrid of athletic precision and philosophical intent. The Academy's first cohort was a deliberate challenge to every established genetic management protocol. 37 different species, each selected not for their combat potential but for their capacity for adaptive learning. Young beings who had previously been designated for specific limited purposes were now exploring the full breadth of their potential. A Zorn adolescent studied quantum communication theory alongside a Mulhari genetic reconstructionist, a species previously bred solely for manual labor, worked on advanced mathematical modeling with a young being from a diplomatic communication species. The traditional barriers of genetic optimization were systematically dismantled. Dr. Alia Zen's research had become the foundational text of a new scientific understanding. Her comprehensive analysis of Rodriguez's combat methodology had revealed something profound. Adaptation was not just a survival mechanism, but the highest form of intelligence. Intelligence is not about perfection, Rodriguez would tell the students. It's about the capacity to understand, to change, to see potential where others see limitation. Vexana's transformation was equally remarkable. Her neural networks, once a perfect combat algorithm, had developed into something approaching genuine consciousness. She had become more than a weapon, more than a product of genetic engineering. She was now a partner, an educator, a being, exploring her own potential. The galactic economic systems that had previously relied on genetic optimization began a fundamental restructuring. Genetic engineering corporations were forced to reimagine their entire business model. No longer could they sell predetermined potential. They now had to explore genuine individual capability. The Interspecies Genetic Management Council, once a powerful regulatory body, was dismantled. In its place, a new collaborative research initiative emerged. Its primary focus, understanding the nature of adaptive potential across different species. Rodriguez's family history became a subject of intense study. Generations of individuals who had challenged established paradigms in science, military strategy, cultural understanding were mapped and analyzed. He was not an anomaly. He was a continuation of a profound human potential that had always existed but rarely been fully understood. The Academy's training methodology was revolutionary. Traditional combat training was replaced with comprehensive adaptive learning. Students were taught not to master a specific skill, but to develop the capacity to learn, to understand, to transform. A typical training session might involve quantum communication exercises, adaptive problem-solving scenarios, interspecies cultural exchange, philosophical exploration of potential, physical training that emphasized adaptability over predetermined technique. Vexana developed a training module that became foundational to the Academy's approach. Combat is a language, she would demonstrate. Every movement is a form of communication. Every challenge is an opportunity to understand. The planetary platform itself was a living demonstration of adaptive potential. Its quantum adaptive structure could reconfigure itself based on the collective learning of its inhabitants. Environments shifted, learning spaces transformed. The very architecture became a reflection of the beings who inhabited it. Rodriguez's personal quarters told the story of his transformation. Military commendations sat alongside xenobiological research texts. Quantum physics journals were stacked next to cultural anthropology databases. A single data crystal contained not just his personal history, but a growing repository of interspecies understanding. During a rare moment of reflection, he reviewed the data from his original championship match. The moment he caught Vexana's axe, a split second that had changed everything, was analyzed from multiple perspectives. It was no longer just a physical feat. It was a philosophical argument about the nature of potential. The Academy's first graduation ceremony was unlike any previous educational milestone. Instead of a simple celebration, it was a quantum broadcast event that reached every corner of known space. 37 graduates representing 37 different species demonstrated not a specific skill, but a capacity for understanding that transcended genetic, cultural, and physiological boundaries. As the ceremony concluded, Rodriguez and Vexana stood together, a living demonstration that true potential knows no predetermined limitations. The system that had created them as weapons was gone. A new possibility had emerged.